Ambassador Woolsey, you're a former boss of Central Intelligence, you're former boss of the Navy, you used to be an arms negotiator for the United States, but you're up in Canada now. Are we in some sort of trouble?
No, far from it. The Canadians are our buddies.
What brings you to Toronto? You're with the Mackenzie Institute today. What are you here for?
So I was up here for a meeting with them and another meeting with a Canadian businessman I'm talking to about some various matters.
What kind of work do you do? You're obviously not working for the U.S. government anymore, but obviously you have a lot of experience and knowledge, much of which is unfortunately relevant to the world today.
Yeah, I'm mainly working in energy and security, and largely as a consultant. Occasionally I do some writing and public speaking about it. Different types of issues. One is our problems caused by our oil dependence. By that, I don't mean just the United States, I mean the world for transportation. And the other is the problem of a rogue nation such as North Korea or Iran getting the ability to use electromagnetic pulse to knock out our electric grids, and that's a huge problem.
Now, we've seen that in science fiction. For example, in Ocean's 12 or something, they use an electromagnetic pulse to knock out the power in Vegas. How would that happen? Is that typically with a nuclear device? How does one do an electromagnetic pulse?
It could be with a nuclear device, but it's been happening for a little over 9 billion years as the sun has been bombarding the Earth with essentially something very much like electrically charged lightning. And there were huge events of this kind, solar events in the past, that had we had the electronics that we have today, would have been devastating to the whole world's electric grids. But electronics compared to, let's say, the early 60s, electronics today are between 1 million and 1 billion times more capable than they were back then, but they're also between 1 million and 1 billion times more vulnerable. So if you get a pulse that is generated, let's say, by a nuclear weapon being detonated in orbit, doesn't have to be targeted at anything on the land, and it's over, let's say, North America, I'm afraid we would drag you guys with us, and our electric grids would be inoperative for a long time.
Is there any intelligence that's publicly available that suggests that North Korea or another rogue entity, maybe Iran even, has designs on an EMP weapon like that?
The weapon is simply the detonation of a simple nuclear weapon. There doesn't have to be anything sophisticated about the weapon, more so than the bomb we dropped at Hiroshima. If a country has the capacity to put a satellite in orbit, which is relatively easy, North Korea has done that 3 times, I think, and it has nuclear weapons, and North Korea has those as well. We know because we tried to keep them from getting them and we failed. Then the combination of having the ability to put the nuclear weapon in orbit and just detonate it whenever it, in low Earth orbit, a couple of times a day, it'll cross over the United States, let's say. One could take out the American electric grid.
I want to switch topics. You mentioned dependency on oil, and I don't think that's going to end anytime soon. Even the Greenpeace extremists talk about a 40-year phase out. Chinese demand for oil, while it might be growing less quickly because of the economy, is still growing. Let me ask you this. A year ago, Anders Fogh Rasmussen, who was then the Secretary General of NATO, said in London that he had intelligence that Russia had infiltrated Western environmentalist groups for the purpose of slowing down or hampering Western ethical oil competitors to Russian conflict oil. Here, let's just take a quick look at the clip.
The better the energy security. But I have one additional remark on shale gas, because I have met allies who can report that Russia, as part of their sophisticated information and disinformation operations, engage actively with so-called non-governmental organizations, environmental organizations working against shale gas obviously, to maintain European dependence on imported Russian gas. That's my interpretation.
I understand what he's saying, and we've seen Prince Walid of Saudi Arabia write an urgent memo to the Saudi Energy Ministry saying that American shale oil and Canadian oil sands are an existential threat to OPEC. What steps, and you're a former director of intelligence, what steps do you see OPEC or Russia doing to infiltrate Western popular culture, political culture, media culture, NGO culture, to demonize our ethical oil to clear the way for their cartel conflict oil?
Well, I don't see oil as different depending on where it comes from. What matters is the price. We're not addicted to oil, but our cars are. And they can't drive on anything else. We can't be as smart as the Brazilians and pull into a filling station and say, I'm going to drive on this instead of that. I see that the sugar-based ethanol is cheaper, the Brazilian says, so I'm going to buy that today. And he decides then, and therefore you got competition in the Brazilian market. And you can't, if OPEC tries to drive the price of oil up by restricting production, or if Russia tries to get people to do that, even though they're not a member of OPEC, they're not going to succeed in getting the price up as long as other countries are willing to produce and keep the price down, say somewhere in the 40s. So I think that what's needed is competition. What's needed is to break the cartel, and I don't want to just weaken it, I want to break it. And if we can break OPEC, then we'll have a situation in which I think people can drive on other products such as natural gas generated liquids, such as electricity. And we could have a situation where oil is finally facing competition, price competition, to get the job done of transportation. And I would like to see oil have to fight for every penny.
Well, look, natural gas-based vehicles, that's a very obscure
Not natural
fringe.
gas-based vehicles. I said natural gas, gas to liquid
Got it,
vehicles.
but
That's
that-
very different. No, it's not a fringe.
What percentage of vehicles in the world
It's
have
relative.
natural gas liquids?
It's really quite.
I'm pro natural gas. I'm pro fracking.
It's really quite easy to produce methanol with an M from natural gas. You can produce methanol from a lot of different
You talk
things.
about
but
sugar-based fuel in Brazil.
Right.
We've tried. There's ethanol mandates in Canada. Subsidies
I'm not
in the
talking about a
States.
mandate. I'm not in favor of mandates.
Well, then
I'm in
how-
favor of price competition.
Well, I have yet to see in either the United States or Canada
Well-
the economic facts supporting the competitive. The
wanna-
fact that they need subsidies or mandates, isn't that a sign that it's not competitive?
First of all, I think we get rid of oil subsidies and mandates.
Give me an example of an oil subsidy or mandate.
The tax system in the United States is shot through here and there with benefits to oil, the depletion allowance, on and on. The point, though,
So you would take, but
I would get rid of everybody's little benefits from tax codes, including oils. I would let oil compete, make oil compete. And I think that you will find that because the price of gas is down really quite low, natural gas is down quite low, companies are working very hard to come up with transitions from using natural gas in vehicles, which is a limited use, to being able to use natural gas generated liquid fuels, which I think will prove before too many years are up to be a very attractive way to power transportation.
are you for or against the Keystone XL pipeline?
I think it's fine to have the Keystone XL pipeline.
Are you for or against exporting of crude oil from the United States? Right now, there's a
I'm in
ban.
favor of letting the market work. Whatever is not controlled by OPEC, whatever creates problems for OPEC, I think is a good idea because it will, in time, help pull the price down. OPEC is an instrumentality usually for keeping the price up. Right now, Saudi Arabia is trying to keep it down in order to damage economically Iran, and that's good. I think we ought to try to damage Iran economically.
All right. I just, it seems to me that you're talking about what I call a fantasy fuel of the future.
It's
that's
nonsense.
Perfect in every way, except for it's not here
a
right now.
fantasy fuel, and it's not perfect
do you know
in
a
every
single
way.
person in the
It's
world
not,
who's driving
it's not
natural gas
perfect.
liquids?
It's not perfect.
I'm pro natural gas.
It's not perfect in every way to make liquid fuels from natural gas, but it is chemically relatively easy to do, and it was not sensible when natural gas was up several times the price it is now. But with fracking, we've been able to get the price of gas down into $3 range, and that is extremely conducive to moving toward being able to switch its filling station between gasoline and liquid fuel derived from natural gas if you want.
Should we remove any subsidies to ethanol and other sugar or corn?
Yes.
Okay. I want to switch gears because we're almost out of time. I appreciate your time today, Ambassador. Let's talk about what's going on in Syria right now. Vladimir Putin is on the ground in a serious way, not just with jets and helicopters, but with tanks, including some modern T-90 tanks.
Right.
I read reports that I don't credit that say he has authority from the Russian parliament to send in up to 150,000 troops. I don't believe that. I think it'll be Iranian cannon fodder on the ground with Russian air.
Russia's a dictatorship. He doesn't need any authority from a
It's
parliament
a
to do anything.
Of course not.
Yeah, it's nonsense.
It was a symbolic rubber stamp of him, but he's in heavy. I mean, he's and Obama. I see just the new U.S. Secretary of Defense now has a rule that any American jets coming within 20 nautical miles of Russian jets must turn tail and run. So it's almost like America is taking a posture of flee, and they've left a void by not taking out the Islamic State.
Well, it's worse than just jiggering air flights in such a way that you don't come closer than 20 miles to one another. That's kind of routine. What is really been bad was, I think, Obama's promising the people of Syria that he would 3 years ago intervene against Assad if Assad used chemical weapons, and then Assad used chemical weapons, and President Obama shrugged and turned the problem over to Russia. I think that we have been far too pusillanimous with respect to challenging Iran and Assad. And dealing with the situation in that part of the world. But the 20-mile gap so planes don't fly into one another is far from the most important aspect of it.
I know. It just seems like a symbol of complete deference. I see that Lebanon's government is talking about inviting the Russians in to help train them. I see Iraq's government.
Lebanon's controlled by Hezbollah.
Iraq,
Iraq is largely controlled by Iran these days.
So we have a new... Instead of the Soviet bloc in the Eastern Europe under the Soviets, we have a new bloc: Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Iran.
Yeah, Iran and Russia are collaborating in putting together those two empires, the Iranian Empire and the Russian Empire, are collaborating in getting adherents and dominating that part of the world through their imperial behavior. There's no doubt about it. And Iraq is part of it and is heavily controlled by Iran, much of it. Same is true of Lebanon. The same increasingly is true of Yemen because the Iranians are buying the Houthis to go down and start military action, including using Scud missiles in Yemen.
How's it going to end? It doesn't look like is it going to end with a nuclear bomb for Iran?
Iran may already have a nuclear weapon, only if they have been much slower than countries such as Pakistan and South Africa and North Korea in the processes. But if you look at what they've done to date and how much time they've had, I think Iran, partly because of this very poor agreement that the United States went into with them and other countries, I think that Iran is going to essentially be in a situation where it can be very, very much a heavyweight in that part of the world. And it is not good for that part of the world, because other countries are going to copy Iran and move to having nuclear weapons. It will not be long if Iran gets a nuke before Saudi Arabia and Turkey and on and on. And you will have then crises in the Middle East in which half a dozen countries have nuclear weapons, and some of their hatreds go back many, many centuries. They may well not be as sane as it turned out we and the Russians could be. We weren't superb, but at least we didn't blow one another of the world up. But who can say what's going to happen in a future in the Middle East with all these countries having nuclear weapons, because Iran started it and now they're going to follow Iran.
Ambassador Woolsey, you've been very generous with your time. Nice to meet you.
Good to be with you.
Thank you.
Ow! We're building a studio. Help us out. Click here or visit buildthedream.ca.